After 5 days of non-stop music, camping under the stars, and living in a blissful bubble away from the real world, the drive back felt surreal. Our car, a trusty old thing that had seen better days, was packed to the brim with camping gear, dirty clothes, and the remnants of festival food. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the shared feeling of contentment, the shared experience that had brought us closer together. Tom, Jen, and I had been planning this trip for months. Seeing our favorite bands live, discovering new ones, and just being part of the festival's sea of people was a dream come true. And as we drove back, the euphoria hadn't worn off one bit. If anything, it was amplified in the confined space of the car, every mile taking us further away from the festival grounds, but closer to cementing these memories into our lives. The motorway was almost deserted, the kind of quiet you only get late at night. It was the perfect backdrop for us to relive the past few days. Tom, ever the comedian, mimicked the artists we'd seen, making us laugh so hard it hurt. Jen, with her sharp memory, recounted hilarious incidents we'd already forgotten, like the time I tried to dance to electronic music and ended up looking like I was swatting invisible flies. And me, I was just happy to steer us through the night, keeping the vibe alive with a carefully curated playlist. Every so often, we'd pass under the bright lights of an overhead sign, illuminating the interior of the car in a stark, artificial light that somehow made these moments feel even more cinematic. It was during one of these fleeting instances of illumination that Tom announced he had never felt more alive. Jen agreed, her face glowing with the kind of pure joy you only see in children on Christmas morning. I felt it too, this unspoken bond that had tethered our souls together through the shared love of music and adventure. We sang along to every song that came on the radio, our voices blending together in perfect disharmony. It didn't matter that we were off-key or that we forgot half the lyrics. What mattered was the feeling, the moment, the unbreakable connection. Every now and then, Jen would take over the aux cable, playing songs we had heard live. And for those few minutes, we were transported back to the festival, the music enveloping us in a warm embrace. As the night wore on, our conversation turned reflective. We talked about future plans, dreams, and the inevitable return to our daily routines. But there was a unanimous feeling of not wanting to let go of this moment, of trying to hold on to the magic for as long as we could. The road stretched out in front of us, an endless ribbon cutting through the darkness, and it felt like we were the only people in the world. The festival might have ended, but as we drove through the night, it was clear that the memories we had created would stay with us forever. It was a bittersweet feeling, knowing that this chapter was coming to a close, but also realizing that we had lived it to the fullest. And as the first hints of dawn began to light the sky, it felt like a promise of new beginnings, of more adventures to come, of more memories waiting to be made. In that moment, nothing else mattered. We were infinite. The decision to stop wasn't planned. It was one of those mutual, unspoken agreements that came about naturally after hours on the road. The service station appeared on the horizon like a beacon, its lights cutting through the darkness, a solitary outpost in the night. We were drawn to it, not just by the need for a restroom break or the craving for something other than festival food, but by an inherent desire for a brief return to civilization before we concluded our journey. As I turned off the motorway, the silence of the empty roads was replaced by the soft hum of the service station. It stood isolated, surrounded by nothing but the dark expanse of the night. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few scattered vehicles that looked as though they had been abandoned there for ages. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long, eerie shadows across the asphalt, creating a scene that felt like something out of a movie. It was unsettling, yet oddly fascinating. We parked and stretched our legs, the stiffness from the long drive reminding us of our physical limits. The air was cooler than expected, a gentle breeze carrying whispers of the night that made me shiver. We joked about it, attributing the chill to our tired bodies, but there was an unspoken agreement that the place felt odd. The energy was different here, almost as if we had stepped into a space where the normal rules didn't apply. Walking into the service station, the automatic doors sliding open with a whir, we were greeted by the sterile smell of cleaning products and the low buzz of ambient music playing through the speakers. It was devoid of life, save for a lone cashier who looked as though they'd rather be anywhere else. The interior was overly bright, the kind of harsh lighting that leaves no shadow untouched, making everything appear flat and lifeless. It was a stark contrast to the warmth of our car and the camaraderie we shared. We split up momentarily, each attending to our needs. The restroom was colder than the rest of the building, the tiles underfoot feeling like ice. Every sound seemed amplified, from the drip of a faulty tap to the distant hum of the air conditioning. It was disorienting, the kind of sensation that makes you feel like you're being watched. Emerging from the restroom, we regrouped and headed towards the convenience store section, our footsteps echoing in the silence. The shelves were stocked with an array of snacks and souvenirs, the kind of things you'd never buy unless you were here. In the middle of nowhere, at an ungodly hour, we browsed aimlessly, picking up items and putting them back, the mundane activity a comforting reminder of normality. However, the unease never fully dissipated. There was a palpable tension in the air, a feeling of anticipation, as if the night was holding its breath. We made light-hearted comments about the creepy vibes, trying to dispel the growing sense of dread with humor. But deep down, we all felt it, a whisper in the back of our minds, urging us to hurry, to leave this place behind. Returning to the car, our laughter and banter resumed, a defense mechanism against the unease that clung to us like a second skin. Yet, as we approached the vehicle, a sense of foreboding settled over me. It was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a sudden drop in temperature, an inexplicable feeling that something had changed during our brief absence. And then we saw it. The silhouette of someone sitting in the back seat, a presence unexpected and uninvited. As we approached the car, the sight of the figure in the back seat halted us in our tracks. The initial shock of seeing someone there where no one should have been sent a ripple of unease through me. It was a moment frozen in time, our laughter dying in our throats, replaced by a heavy silence that weighed down on us. Tom was the first to break it, his voice a mix of confusion and concern. "Did one of you get in the car while we were inside?" His question hung in the air, unanswered. We all knew it wasn't possible. We'd left the car together and returned together. The figure sat motionless, its outline barely distinguishable in the dim light. The situation felt surreal, like a scene from one of those horror movies we used to watch as teenagers, daring each other to not look away. Except this was real, too real, and the adrenaline that began to course through my veins was not born of excitement, but of fear. Jen moved closer to the car, her curiosity overcoming her apprehension. "Maybe it's someone who needs help," she suggested, her voice tinged with a hope that sounded fragile in the thickening silence. Her hand reached for the door handle, but I stopped her, my own hand gripping her arm tighter than I intended. "Wait," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Something's not right." The figure in the back seat made no move to acknowledge our presence. No shift in posture, no turn of the head, nothing. It was as if they were unaware of the world outside the glass that separated us. Or perhaps, choosing to ignore it. The air around us felt charged, a static energy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was a feeling I couldn't shake, a primal warning system that screamed danger. We stood there, a small group bound by friendship but suddenly isolated by fear, our minds racing with possibilities. Theories were thrown around, each more implausible than the last. Had someone broken into the car while we were inside? Was it a prank, a scare designed to test our nerves? Or was it something else, something beyond our understanding? Tom, ever the pragmatist, suggested we confront the situation head-on. "Let's just open the door and find out," he said, a determined edge to his voice. But his bravery wasn't contagious. The rest of us hesitated, the collective fear holding us back. It was a standoff, not just with the figure in the car, but with our own trepidation. The decision to open the car door felt monumental, a pivotal moment that would shatter the eerie calm that had enveloped us. With a deep breath, I nodded to Tom, silently giving him the go-ahead. He reached out, his hand steady but his eyes betraying a hint of the fear we all felt. The door opened with a soft click, breaking the silence like a gunshot in the night. The interior light flicked on, casting a harsh glow that revealed the back seat in stark detail. And there, sitting motionless, was not a person, but a pile of our own belongings that had been shuffled and stacked in a way that, from a distance, mimicked the shape of a human figure. Relief washed over us in an almost tangible wave, our laughter returning, though now tinged with a hint of hysteria. It was a moment of release, the tension dissipating as quickly as it had built. But the relief was short-lived, a fleeting reprieve in the night's unfolding drama. As we began to relax, a cold breeze swept through the open door, carrying with it a whisper of sound that chilled me to the bone. It was a soft, almost inaudible hum, a melody that seemed familiar, yet entirely out of place. The sound seemed to emanate from the car itself, as if the vehicle had absorbed the energy of the night and was now echoing it back to us. The realization that the figure had been an illusion did little to ease the growing sense of unease. Questions swirled in my mind, each more unsettling than the last. Had we imagined the figure due to our exhausted state? Or had something else been at play, something that toyed with our perceptions, leading us to see what wasn't there? The decision to leave the service station was made with haste, a unanimous desire to put distance between us and the night's eerie events. But as we drove away, the atmosphere in the car had changed. The camaraderie that had defined our journey thus far was overshadowed by a lingering sense of dread, a shared feeling that we had narrowly escaped something beyond our comprehension. And so we continued on, the road stretching out before us, the darkness enveloping us like a shroud. The music that had once filled the car with life now seemed hollow, an attempt to drown out the silence that had settled among us. We drove in near silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the events at the service station replaying over and over in our minds. The laughter and light-hearted banter that had characterized our journey thus far were gone, replaced by a palpable tension that no one seemed able to shake. Tom was the first to speak, his voice cutting through the heavy air. "What was that back there?" he asked, though it seemed more to himself than to any of us. None of us had an answer. The logical part of our brains knew it had been a trick of the light, our tired minds playing games with us. But another part, a deeper, more instinctual part, whispered that it had been something else, something we couldn't quite understand. Jen sat quietly, her usual vivaciousness dimmed by the night's events. She hugged her arms around herself as if to ward off a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Every now and then, she would glance back at the empty seats behind us, as if half expecting to see something, or someone, sitting there. The more we drove, the more the feeling of unease grew. It was as if the car itself had become a vessel for our fears, each mile adding to the sense of foreboding that hung over us. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind was elsewhere, caught in a loop of what-ifs and maybes. The rational explanations seemed increasingly thin, unable to fully dispel the shadow that the night had cast over our spirits. As we neared another service station, a silent agreement was reached to keep driving. No one suggested stopping, and if they had, I doubt anyone would have agreed. The desire to get home, to return to the safety and familiarity of our own beds, was overwhelming. The rest of the drive was a blur of streetlights and shadows, the world outside the car window seeming distant and unreal. When we finally reached our destination, the relief was palpable, but so was a strange feeling of loss. The adventure that had started with such excitement and joy had ended with a silent drive through the dark, a journey shadowed by an experience we couldn't explain. We said our goodbyes quickly, each of us eager to retreat into the safety of our homes. But as I lay in bed that night, the events at the service station replayed in my mind. Had it been a harmless trick of our imaginations? A shared hallucination brought on by fatigue and the eerie setting? Or had we brushed up against something unexplainable, a glimpse into a world beyond our understanding? The questions lingered unanswered as I drifted off to sleep. The night's events had changed something, a subtle shift in the way I viewed the world. The line between the known and the unknown had blurred, leaving me with a sense of wonder and unease that I knew would stay with me long after the memories of the festival had faded. The drive back to the service station felt longer than it should have. Each mile stretched out before us, filled with a heavy silence that seemed to thicken the air. The lightheartedness that had once filled the car was now a distant memory, replaced by a growing sense of dread. None of you spoke. The weight of what had happened and what we were about to do hung over you like a shroud. When the service station finally came into view, it looked different somehow, as if the place had absorbed the night's eerie energy and made it its own. The lights that had seemed welcoming before now flickered in a mocking dance, casting long, sinister shadows across the parking lot. We parked the car and sat for a moment, gathering our courage. The task ahead seemed daunting, a step into the unknown that none of us were truly prepared for. Tom was the first to break the silence. "We need a plan," he said, his voice steady, but I could hear the underlying tension. We agreed to split up. Tom would search the inside of the service station, combing through the convenience store and restrooms, while Jen and I would scour the parking lot and surrounding area. The thought of separating, even for a short time, filled me with an inexplicable fear, but I nodded. We needed to cover as much ground as possible. The moment we stepped out of the car, the chill of the night air hit me, a stark reminder of the reality we were facing. The service station, with its harsh fluorescent lighting, felt like an island in a sea of darkness. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that unseen eyes were tracking our every move. Jen and I started with the parking lot, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. Each beam of light seemed insignificant against the overwhelming blackness that surrounded us. We checked each car, peering into windows and checking for any sign of... what? I wasn't even sure. A part of me still hoped this was all a misunderstanding, a bizarre joke that had gone too far. But as we moved from car to car, finding nothing, the hope began to fade, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. What if we were too late? What if whatever had been in our car had taken her? The thought was too horrific to entertain, and I pushed it away, focusing on the task at hand. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, we expanded our search to the edges of the parking lot, where the light from the station didn't reach. The darkness here was oppressive, a physical entity that seemed to push back against us as we moved. Every shadow seemed to move, every noise a potential threat. My imagination ran wild, conjuring images of what might be lurking just beyond the reach of our lights. When we heard a scream, high-pitched and filled with terror, coming from the direction of the service station, our blood ran cold. Without a word, Jen and I turned and ran towards the sound, fear lending speed to our steps. As we neared the source of the scream, I braced myself for what we might find, images of horror movies flashing through my mind. But it wasn't horror that awaited us. It was relief, so profound it nearly brought me to my knees. There, in front of the service station, was Tom, looking equally relieved and terrified, and beside him, Jen, the real Jen, our Jen, her face flushed from running and her eyes wide with fear and confusion. The story tumbled out in bits and pieces. She'd gotten lost on her way back from the restroom, taken a wrong turn, and ended up on the opposite side of the station. When she'd finally found her way back, the sight of us searching had scared her as much as we were scared now. We laughed then, a release of tension so intense it bordered on hysteria. The relief was palpable, a tangible thing that wrapped around us like a warm blanket. We were together again, safe and sound, the night's fears banished by the simple fact of our reunion. But as we headed back to the car, a part of me couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my bones. The relief of finding Jen was real, but so was the fear we'd experienced. As we drove away from the service station for the second time, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that the shadows had followed us. The rest of the drive was uneventful, the normalcy of it almost jarring after the night's events. When we finally arrived home, the first light of dawn was breaking, casting a soft glow over everything. It felt like a benediction, a promise that the night was truly over. We said our goodbyes quickly, the need for sleep overshadowing everything else. But as I lay in bed, the events of the night replaying in my mind, sleep proved elusive. The darkness of my room felt oppressive, echoing the inky shadows of the service station parking lot. Each creak of the house, each whisper of wind against the window, sent a jolt of fear through me. The rational part of my mind knew it was over, that we were safe. But the primal, instinctual part was not so easily convinced. The encounter at the service station, though it ended with the relief of finding Jen safe, had left its mark. It was a reminder of how quickly things could shift from the mundane to the mysterious, how thin the veil might be between the normal and the paranormal. Despite the logical explanations we had concocted for the night's events, part of me wondered if there wasn't more to it, something deeper, something unseen. As the first rays of the morning sun began to filter through the curtains, casting light into the room, I found a semblance of peace. The fear that had gripped me throughout the night began to recede, overshadowed by the coming day. Yet I knew that this experience would stay with me, a story to recount in hushed tones, a memory that would resurface every time I found myself driving at night, passing a lonely service station on a deserted road. In the light of day, the world seemed ordinary again, the events of the night relegated to the realm of memory. Life resumed its usual pace, the demands of the day pushing aside the shadows of the night before. But every so often, in quiet moments, I would find myself reflecting on the experience, the fear, the relief, and the lingering sense of wonder. The encounter at the service station had been a journey into the unknown, a brush with something that defied easy explanation. It was a reminder of the mysteries that lay just beyond the edge of our understanding, waiting in the shadows. And though we had returned to our normal lives, the memory of that night remained, a testament to the thin line between the ordinary and the extraordinary. So if you ever find yourself on a deserted road, late at night, with only the stars for company, remember our story. Be wary of the shadows, for you never know what might be lurking just out of sight, waiting in the darkness. And should you ever encounter something that defies explanation, something that sends a shiver down your spine, know that you're not alone. For the world is full of mysteries, and sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that are true. As dawn broke and the world around me lightened, I finally drifted off to sleep, the fears of the night giving way to dreams. And when I awoke, the events of the night felt like a distant dream, a shadowy memory that was hard to grasp. But it was a memory that would linger, a story to be shared, a reminder of the night we encountered the unknown at a lonely service station on a deserted road. The morning after was surreal, almost as if the events of the night before belonged to another lifetime. I woke up to a world that seemed too normal, too mundane, to have been the setting for the fears and mysteries we had encountered. Yet, the sunlight streaming through the windows couldn't fully dispel the shadows that lingered in my mind. Shadows cast not by physical objects, but by memories and unanswered questions. I reached for my phone first thing, half expecting, or perhaps half hoping, for a message from Tom or Jen. Something that would tell me that last night had been nothing more than a collective hallucination, a shared nightmare we could laugh off in the light of day. But my phone lay silent, its screen devoid of any messages, a silent testament to the reality of our experience. The decision to go back for the car was made with a heavy heart. I knew I couldn't leave it behind, abandoned at that Eerie service station. Yet the thought of returning filled me with a deep, unshakable dread. I tried to convince myself that it was just a car, just a place, that daylight would strip away the night's fears and leave behind nothing but the ordinary. But the knot of anxiety in my stomach refused to unravel. The drive back to the service station was a journey through a landscape that seemed at once familiar and utterly alien. The roads, the trees, the very sky above me, everything was tinged with the memory of the night before. And as the service station came into view, its mundane appearance in the bright light of day did little to ease my apprehension. I parked in the same spot we had left from, the space now empty, the car gone. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the empty spot, a myriad of emotions washing over me. Relief that I didn't have to face the journey home in that car, laden with memories and fear. Confusion at how it could have disappeared without a trace. And a deep, unsettling sense of loss, not for the car itself, but for the normalcy it represented, now irrevocably shattered. The service station was busy now, filled with people going about their day, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded in this same spot just hours before. I watched them for a moment, envy mingling with my anxiety. To them, this was just a stop on the road, a place to stretch their legs, grab a coffee, a brief pause in their journey. But for me, it had become something else entirely, a place where the thin veil between the ordinary and the extraordinary had been pulled back, revealing the mysteries and terrors that lay beyond. I made a report about the car, though I could tell from the disinterested expressions of the staff that they considered it a minor inconvenience at best. To them, it was just one of many cars, one of many incidents, nothing out of the ordinary. I wanted to scream, to make them understand that it was so much more than that what had happened to us was anything but ordinary. But in the end, I simply filled out the forms and left, the weight of the experience heavy on my shoulders. The drive home was long and silent, my thoughts a tangled mess of fear, wonder, and 1,000 unanswered questions. What had we encountered that night? Who or what had been in the back seat of the car? And where were Tom and Jen now? My calls to them went unanswered, their voices a memory that seemed to fade with each passing mile. In the days that followed, I found myself caught in a strange limbo, the world around me moving on, as if nothing had happened, while I remained trapped in the shadow of that night. I told the story to a few close friends, but their reactions ranged from disbelief to rational explanations that fell short of capturing the true nature of our experience. It was clear that this was something I would carry alone, a personal encounter with the unknown that defied explanation. And so, I turn to you, dear listener, not just as a storyteller, but as a witness to the mysteries that lie in the dark corners of our world. If you've ever experienced something you can't explain, something that haunts your dreams and tugs at the edges of your understanding, know that you're not alone. We live in a world filled with wonders and terrors, with mysteries that beckon us closer, even as they send shivers down our spine. Let this story be a reminder to keep your eyes open, to question the shadows, and to wonder at the unknown. For in the end, it's these encounters with the unexplainable that remind us of the vastness of our world, of the endless possibilities that exist just beyond the reach of our understanding. And perhaps, in sharing our stories, we can find solace in the knowledge that the world is more complex and mysterious than we could ever have imagined.